Welcome to our APEC Golden Gate Declaration 1 year later. It's really hard to believe that a year ago, all the world leaders descended upon the city of San Francisco. We welcome Ambassador Matt Murray, who is here from Peru. Can't wait to hear all about it. And we have Ambassador Jeff Bleich, who is going to moderate, and he is visiting us from all the way down in Stanford. Welcome to our board, our advisory council, and our members. In our audience today, we have the city's chief of protocol, Maryam Muduroglu. She's going to give opening remarks. We have from California State, Evan Reed. From Commerce, Doug Wallace. We have consuls general or representatives from Australia, Canada, China, Japan, Korea, the Philippines, and Singapore. And we are so thrilled to be hosting at the City Club. We're excited to share that we're going to move into offices downstairs, and we're going to be working more closely with Martin Brown and his team. So thank you very much to the City Club. We're happy to be here. Welcome also to our audience that is joining by Zoom. I'm Margaret Conley, the Executive Director of Asian Society, Northern California and Seattle. I'm here with my team. Nina and Christy and Renee and Jason, Evan, our interns and volunteers are all helping us, and we cannot do it without them. Our program format, Maryam Muduroglu will say a few words, Ambassador Murray will present, Ambassador Bleich will moderate a discussion, and then we're going to have time for audience Q&A, and we do want to hear from you. So we do have microphones. They'll be brought around to you. Please take your time, ask a question, introduce yourself, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. We'll have a short reception afterwards right in the back of the room. This is on the record, and we are recording. A few words about our speakers. Ambassador Matt Murray, he's the U.S. senior official for APEC. He has been posted in Beijing, Shanghai, Dar es Salaam, Delhi, and DC. He is just returning from Peru. He led the efforts of APEC here in San Francisco, and we can fully appreciate how much work goes into hosting one of these things after being through it ourselves. And we pride ourselves on how beautiful the city of San Francisco was at this time last year. Plus, the pandas are coming, which hopefully we'll hear about. Ambassador Jeff Bleich is a visiting scholar at Stanford University's Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences. He serves on the President's National Security Education Board. He was previously U.S. Ambassador to Australia, and that's special to us at Asia Society because it is our season of Australia globally at Asia Society. He's special counsel. He also served as special counsel to the President in the White House and a senior advisor to the Director of National Intelligence. And Maryam Muduroglu is a San Francisco native. She's the city's chief of protocol. She meets with all the visiting leaders and delegations, artists and scholars, and she was instrumental in San Francisco having a successful APEC. So please welcome all the speakers, and let's bring Maryam up to the podium.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I don't know if she mentioned that I'm on my way to a black tie event, and only in San Francisco can we do protocol, APEC, and opera in the same evening. So thank you so much for having me. Ambassador Murray, it was great to see you again after 1 year. Cannot believe it's been a year. It was really wonderful to work with you, and similarly, Ambassador Bleich, thank you so much for being here. Consuls, esteemed guests, it's an honor to be able to say a few words regarding APEC 2023. And what I would say is when I received a call from Chief of Staff a month after I took my appointment as Chief of Protocol, informing me that APEC 2023 would be hosted in San Francisco, and it is only the largest international conference since the signing of the UN Charter in 1945. And I would say I was a bit overwhelmed, and that is an understatement. But with that announcement came an incredible opportunity for us to showcase San Francisco on a global stage and counter the negative narrative about the city and make both our city and country proud. And I believe that we did just that and maybe even more. Just want to talk to you about the impact and some of the deliverables. APEC 2023 brought over 25,000 delegates, business leaders, and journalists to San Francisco, reactivating the city's community and businesses, as Margaret mentioned. Hotels and restaurants buzzed with activity as they prepared for international visitors, while larger companies found opportunities to engage both financially and diplomatically. The entire city, from its residents to its organizations, stepped up with volunteers, over 1,000 volunteers and city departments working tirelessly to ensure the event's success. APEC generated over $50 million in direct economic benefits, boosting spending in hotels, transportation, and retail, and supporting local businesses and jobs. And talking about pandas and some of the deliverables from APEC 2023, it was nothing short of transformative for our city. The city was spotless and vibrant, its streets alive with excitement, and communities came together united with a share of being excellent hosts to our international guests. And the summit was not only demonstrated San Francisco's capacity to organize and execute a world-class event, but also positioned the city as a leader of technology, sustainability, and global diplomacy, all of which were the themes of APEC 2023. And the week was a resounding success on multiple levels. From a business perspective, companies like Ripple, Salesforce, Visa, Sutter, many others who played a pivotal role in showcasing San Francisco as the epicenter of innovation. And internationally, APEC strengthened relationships, and I know Matt will be speaking more about that, but key diplomatic moments such as President Xi meeting with President Biden, I believe they did that again this year, which led to discussions that resulted in memorandum of understanding to bring a pair of pandas to San Francisco. We're still working on that, but this is an exchange and a simple example that highlights a long-term cultural and diplomatic impact of the summit and furthering a people-to-people relationship. So APEC 2023 wasn't just a conference, it was a statement. It reaffirmed San Francisco's enduring spirit, creativity, and resilience, countering any negative perceptions with a vision of hope and opportunity. It laid the foundation for global gatherings and solidifies San Francisco's capability to be excellent hosts. And simply put, we believe APEC was epic. Thank you so much. We appreciate all of your support. Look forward to hearing your discussions, and it's wonderful to have been here. Thank you.
Well, good evening. And thank you very much for the introduction, Margaret, and a huge thanks to Maryam for everything she did and the city of San Francisco did to really make APEC Economic Leaders Week in San Francisco such a success last year. It's terrific to be back at the Asia Society. My visit with all of you last June was an important ingredient in our very successful US APEC host year, because you asked great questions and you made helpful recommendations, and I look forward to some more of that this evening. So I'm grateful to Margaret for inviting me back, and I'm also very grateful to my former boss, Ambassador Jeff Bleich, for agreeing to moderate this evening. It is hard to believe, as Maryam said, that it's been a year since we experienced such an eventful APEC Economic Leaders Week together here in San Francisco. Some pictures up there on the screen. Which culminated with President Biden's announcement of the Golden Gate APEC Leaders Declaration. To agree by consensus on a leaders declaration, we overcame geopolitical challenges, as well as wide-ranging opinions across the region on the best way forward for economic integration. San Francisco, though, served as the perfect backdrop to inspire APEC member economies, which account for half of global trade and 60% of the world's GDP, to agree on some important next steps related to sustainability and inclusion, innovation policy, and trade and investment, all things that San Francisco does extremely well. And of course, by holding APEC Economic Leaders Week in San Francisco, the APEC meetings also serve as a platform for so many other events, some of which Maryam just talked about, to capitalize on the presence of the many influential government and business leaders who were here, which facilitated important engagements to advance a more interconnected, innovative, and inclusive Asia-Pacific region. So tonight, I'll briefly outline how the events in San Francisco last year helped build a stronger foundation for economic cooperation in the Asia-Pacific, which we continue to carry forward. And I'm just on my way back from this year's APEC Economic Leaders Meeting in Lima, Peru. Because on Saturday, we just wrapped up the APEC 2024 year, where we were able to further advance many of the Golden Gates Declaration's objectives. And Peru then passed the baton to the Republic of Korea as the 2025 host. So I'm going to quickly focus on 3 areas where I think the APEC meetings here in San Francisco helped contribute to a more peaceful and prosperous world and set the stage for APEC to continue to serve as a constructive platform moving forward, as I'll touch on the diplomacy, the international economic policy, and stakeholder engagement pieces. As a diplomatic opportunity, APEC Economic Leaders Week, as Maryam already said, was the largest gathering of foreign leaders in San Francisco since the signing of the UN Charter in 1945. One of the key goals of our US APEC host year was to enhance engagement with like-minded partners and allies, and the participation of the presidents and prime ministers from treaty allies Australia, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Thailand, Canada, and the Philippines, therefore, provided high-level opportunities both for government-to-government interactions and key stakeholder engagements with businesses, universities, and civil society organizations. The same was true, of course, for representatives from other APEC member economies, including Taiwan, New Zealand, Indonesia, Singapore, Vietnam, Brunei, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, Chile, Mexico, and Peru. And we also leveraged the APEC meetings in San Francisco as a means to manage the United States' relationship with the People's Republic of China, the most consequential bilateral relationship in the world. And we maintained open lines of communication with PRC officials and leaders both in the APEC plenary room and via the bilateral meeting with between President Biden and President Xi at Woodside the day prior to the start of the APEC leaders meeting, and which there was another meeting between the two presidents in Lima on Saturday. We made clear to Russia in 2023 that its participation in APEC would not be business as usual so long as Russia's war of aggression continued in Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin therefore did not attend APEC Economic Leaders Week, nor did any other sanctioned Russian officials. Alongside the Golden Gate Leaders Declaration, we collaborated with partners and allies to address the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as conflict in the Middle East in a separate chair statement. So as a diplomatic mechanism, APEC is unique. It's consensus-based, it's non-binding, in a forum that focuses on incubating ideas for economic cooperation. It's been around since 1989, during which time we've collaborated with the region to respond to shared challenges, including not only the Russia-Ukraine war, but also COVID-19, the global financial crisis, 9/11, and the Asian financial crisis. So for the city of San Francisco to serve as a convening force to reinvigorate this unique diplomatic platform following the COVID-19 pandemic was an unparalleled opportunity. And I'm pleased to say that Peru, as the 2024 host, followed your lead. Last week, it was Lima that was abuzz with frenetic high-level diplomatic activity as President Biden, Secretary Blinken, and U.S. Trade Representative Tai collaborated with partners to finalize a consensus leaders declaration and ministerial statement in Lima. Just as San Francisco welcomed your guests with open arms, with amazing welcome events at the Exploratorium and other venues around town, Peru infused a bit of the Latin spirit into APEC's proceedings this year, including an incredible welcome reception at the Plaza Mayor. So second, as an opportunity to advance meaningful international economic policy outcomes, the U.S. APEC host year capitalized on the prevailing view among member economies that in the face of economic headwinds, the climate crisis, and the aftermath of COVID, economic growth in the region is not worth very much if it is not inclusive, sustainable, and resilient. The Golden Gate Declaration, therefore, sought to advance our host year theme of creating a resilient and sustainable future for all, and featured several key leaders-level outcomes, including the San Francisco principles on integrating inclusivity and sustainability into trade and investment policy, the just energy transition principles, the principles for achieving food security through sustainable agri-food systems, and an updated disaster risk reduction framework. In San Francisco, we also finalized ministerial level outcomes, advancing initiatives related to worker education and training, anti-corruption, and cloud computing, further demonstrating the breadth of work APEC leaders and experts can tackle in order to promote economic growth in the region. This year, Peru followed up on and further strengthened many of these outcomes from San Francisco. For example, Peru followed the U.S. host year emphasis on inclusion by developing a roadmap on the transition to the formal and global economies, aiming to better integrate informal economic actors into economic activity in the region through good governance, regulatory reform, financial inclusion, anti-corruption efforts, and innovation through digital tools. Under Peru's leadership, APEC economies also agreed to build out our work on the just energy transition with agreements on specific steps governments and stakeholders can take through an APEC Just Energy Transition initiative. And Peru also continued an emphasis on sustainable agriculture with a new initiative to address food loss and waste. So third, as an opportunity to engage a wide range of stakeholders, the U.S. host year, and especially Leaders Week in San Francisco, showcased the strength of public-private collaboration and the key role played by civil society organizations in the United States and the Asia-Pacific region. 13 years after then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton launched the APEC Women and Economy Forum here in San Francisco, we carried forward work to expand women's economic participation and address some of the persistent challenges women-owned small and medium-sized enterprises face when accessing markets. And we widened the aperture on economic inclusion outreach to other underrepresented groups during the U.S. host year, including a new focus for APEC on indigenous groups. And San Francisco was a great host for the first of its kind APEC dialogue with indigenous leaders. It also was the venue for the first ever APEC multi-stakeholder forum and an APEC Sustainable Future Forum. The United States also pioneered a domestic outreach initiative, APEC Connect, to share APEC priorities with communities around the United States. And we're pleased Peru followed this model with an APEC for the People program this year, through which Peru reached more than 500,000 people across their country. The U.S. APEC host year revitalized public-private sector collaboration in APEC, particularly through the U.S. private sector host committees and San Francisco's efforts to take the APEC CEO Summit to the next level through robust government and business participation, which ensured high-level public-private exchanges with the region. Speeches by President Biden and other government and private sector leaders underscored the importance of the Asia-Pacific to growth in each of our respective economies. And smaller group roundtables and discussions facilitated involvement by companies from both Wall Street and Main Street, including SMEs. The APEC CEO Summit also was a great venue for thought leaders to engage participants, as the Asia Society did through the long conversation. The White House was able to announce last year that U.S. companies represented at the APEC CEO Summit had invested more than $50 billion into APEC economies in 2023, and companies based in the Asia Pacific had invested nearly $200 billion in the United States since 2021, creating tens of thousands of jobs here at home. Moreover, much of this investment in both directions has been in cutting-edge areas such as renewable energy or semiconductors. One of our team's key responsibilities in APEC is to continue to advance strong public-private sector collaboration to create prosperity and jobs. And Peru again followed the U.S. lead in this regard. In addition to the participation of Secretary Blinken and other leaders at last week's CEO Summit in Lima, U.S. private sector leaders again headlined the participation, creating new trade and investment opportunities through APEC. And as the Secretary highlighted in his remarks on Friday, it was also the 30th anniversary of the National Center for APEC, Seattle-based business association's engagement in APEC, which was also a great opportunity to bring more U.S. companies to the fold. So in closing, I just want to again thank San Francisco, thank you, Maryam, for being such great hosts for APEC economic leaders, and to all of you in this room for your support. After any large undertaking like the U.S. APEC host year in 2023, there always are things you wish you could have done better. And we'll probably get into some of those things in the discussion and Q&A. But I took away so many great memories from last year, from whether it was at the Moscone Center or Ferry Building, City Hall, to events at lots of other stops in between. And the United States was able to meet our objectives by leading multilaterally, enhancing engagement with like-minded partners, defending international rules and norms, delivering economic policy outcomes, and advancing public-private collaboration. So it's been extremely gratifying to see Peru take many of these same priorities forward in 2024, and we look forward to Korea's host year next year, and thereafter in 2026 to the People's Republic of China. So thanks very much, and I look forward to our discussion. Good to see you.
Among the many roles that Ambassador Murray's had, one of them was in Camden. I've had the great fortune of working with you. I also want to thank you, Maryam, for your remarks and also for the great showing that San Francisco put out.
You had it for a second.
A little higher. There we go. Yep. Maryam, thank you for the great showing that San Francisco put on. I think it reassured our APEC allies around the world that San Francisco is a magnificent city and not quite the hellscape that it's sometimes portrayed as on cable news. So thank you to you for your work. You're sparkling just like you are tonight. And thank you to Matt for showing the best of American diplomacy to our friends here in San Francisco. So lots of questions about what we accomplished in San Francisco with the Golden Gate Declaration. But what are you most proud of?
I think one of the things that we're the most proud of is really revitalizing the stakeholder engagements piece of it. I think when we had come out of the COVID pandemic, obviously 2022, some hybrid, some in person, it's really hard to meet with stakeholders and meet with businesses and to really make sure that they have a seat at the table when you're having to do everything virtually, right? Yeah. So to be able to really be the first year, like fully back, fully in person, and to make sure that other APEC economies really understood this should be a priority, especially the private sector piece, I think that's what I'm the most proud of. When I made my first trip to San Francisco last January, we were on an advance trip. And of course, as you'll recall, it's all about the talking points. What am I supposed to say when I'm on these trips? And I said in one of the first meetings, well, I only have one talking point, and that is that the CEO Summit has to be right next door to where leaders and ministers are meeting. And of course, the security people weren't very happy about that. They didn't really understand what I was getting at. But fortunately, at the Moscone Center, you have this amazing facility where you can do just that. And so we were able to have the APEC CEO Summit be in the Moscone West, and then leaders meeting in Moscone South. And I just think that part of it was so important because if you have a consensus-based, non-binding organization, you need to have stakeholder buy-in, you need to have private sector buy-in, and if you have that proximity and you're able to do that during Leaders Week, but also all year long, that's just really important. So I think that's the part I'm the most proud of for our team, getting that re-engagement with stakeholders.
Well, one of the stakeholders we're pretty engaged with, China. And as you said, it's one of the most complex and consequential relationships that we have. And you singled it out as the one that we need to manage. So how will we manage it? I know, for example, that we didn't have the chief executive of Hong Kong here in part because of tension. So how would you grade our performance, and what will you think were the highlights or lowlights?
So I think this is one of the areas, again, speaking from the perspective of APEC, where APEC can play such a valuable role, right? Because when you look at the last two times that President Biden and President Xi have met, it's both been on the margins of APEC meetings. So they met on Saturday in Lima, Peru. They also met here in Woodside the day before the leaders meeting started. And so I do think that's another advantage that APEC has, is that it can be that platform for engagement. But I think over the last couple of years, a lot of the focus with China has been on keeping the lines of communication open and on managing our competition in a responsible way and also managing differences. And so, I think that there's been a number of exchanges, and one of the good things was last year, you had a lot of visits by senior US leaders to China, and then also senior leaders from China to the United States in advance of the Biden-Xi meeting at Woodside. And so I think being able to have those conversations, open up some dialogue in key areas, I think that's what we need to continue to do with China, and I think APEC affords us an opportunity to do that.
And how did the conversations work with China on some of the platforms? For example, a transition or collaboration on a just energy transition.
Yeah, so one of the great things about APEC, again, is, and as you'll hear throughout, I'm still 3 years into this job, I'm still a true believer in APEC and what it can do. I think it's that, you have a discussion, 21 economies all trying to get to consensus on something like a just energy transition initiative or just energy transition principles. And so I think that the good news for a lot of APEC economies is there is, I think, unanimous understanding that we all face the same challenges, and climate change is one of those challenges. But then depending on which economy you're in, which government is in, all of that, there's going to be different ways of getting at the problem. And so it actually, last year we were able to move, China towards a discussion on a just energy transition in APEC, and they were also able to hear from other economies around the table. And then that can also carry forward into the bilateral space as well.
Yeah. So to help us understand what just energy transition means in the context of nations that are heavily dependent on use of coal, particularly coking coal.
So the way, and we've had a lot of discussions about this with the Indonesians, for example,
Yes.
and China as well. I mean, the way that I like to think about it is it's a more comprehensive look at how the energy consumption, energy demand really impacts all segments of society. So how do you make sure workers have a seat at the table? How do you make sure that the environmental needs are met? How do you make sure that you're not overly dependent on one fuel source? And I think that, again, a lot of economies can get together at the APEC table and agree to that these things are important things to do, but then it's about how do we accelerate the process forward, and that's probably the next phase of this.
Yeah. One of the other pillars that you discussed was the inclusivity of each of these programs. And in particular, there was a great deal of discussion about gender inclusivity. How did that go in terms of advancing on prior APEC summits?
So I think one of the good things for on gender is that we do have this longer term understanding and realization in APEC over the last decade plus that women's economic participation is a really important feature of what all APEC economies need to do, not least of which because there's a loss of GDP and a loss of economic activity when women aren't fully engaged in the economy. And so that work has expanded out, I think, over the years, including to the point where last year we were able to highlight the issue around gender and climate, that a lot of the negative impacts of climate change are also disproportionately felt by women in many of the economies, member economies of APEC. And so, I think, again, this is an area where there's pretty broad agreement within APEC that we need to do better. Mm-hmm. But obviously, in some of the cultures around the Pacific Rim, it's easier said than done. It will be very interesting to see how the Republic of Korea takes this forward next year, because they do not have a great track record when it comes to women's economic participation. And so that's something where we'll continue to push them a little bit as well.
Yep. Now, what would you have liked to have advanced in San Francisco that for geopolitical reasons or other limitations, you just concluded this is a bridge too far, but it's on your roadmap?
So I think that, there were certainly things about the sustainability agenda where I would have liked to have seen us been able to really put some money behind it, mm-hmm. Really be able to bring some of the corporate leadership, some of the thought leadership from around all the economies, and really, put that into some sort of funding stream that could really support activities and projects. I think that was a bridge too far for last year. It's something I would love to see happen in the future, but it is going to take, in order to get there, I think you have to spend a little bit less time debating about who will be participating in meetings or who won't be participating in meetings, and getting around what we are going to say about the Russia-Ukraine war, what we aren't going to say about the Russia-Ukraine war, some of these real geopolitical issues, you're going to have to really have time to really invest in an initiative like that.
Yeah, well, talking about uncomfortable subjects, I'm sure you got a few questions about the election when you were in Lima.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And in particular, some of the things that you described seem to be subject to renegotiation or reconsideration altogether in light of the change in administration and the fact that this administration has that, you know, the elephant in the room is that there's an elephant in every branch of government now. You know, it's GOP takeover of the White House, both houses of Congress, Supreme Court, and with a very ambitious agenda that doesn't include climate change, multilateral agreements, trade and investment, or inclusivity. So when you're approached by your colleagues in Lima, what were the sort of questions they were asking you, and how did you respond?
Well, I think they asked all of those questions that you just said. I think, look, again, we'll have to see what the new administration comes in, you know, with its, you know, the concrete, like how they would want to leverage APEC going forward. The first Trump administration did participate in APEC meetings. President Trump traveled to Vietnam for Leaders Week. Vice President Pence traveled to Papua New Guinea for Leaders Week. The 2019 APEC Leaders Week, unfortunately, was canceled. It was supposed to be in Chile, but the United States, President Trump actually offered to host it in the United States if there was interest in the other APEC economies doing that, but it was determined the time was too short. And then there was participation virtually in the Malaysia year in 2020. So, APEC's been around for 35 years. Both Republican and Democratic administrations have engaged with it. Obviously, they use APEC in different ways, and they have different areas of emphasis and different areas of focus. And so, our APEC team, all made up of career, foreign service, civil service, contractors. We're going to have to figure out the way that we can be the most supportive of the new administration when they come in. There's a couple of things I think that are important about APEC that I think, and as I told some of our partners who asked, that I do think helps maybe insulate it a little bit is, one is you do have this amazing platform, which we just saw on Friday and Saturday with all the leaders coming together, and it's a good diplomatic platform to make use of, right? That's one thing. Second thing is you have all of the stakeholder engagement. For some of these priorities, like for example, clean energy, stakeholders are moving forward, right? They're taking that forward, whether government goes with them or not. And so some of that's going to continue. And then you have all of the experts that are there, the subject matter experts, to talk about the whole broad agenda. So it'll be interesting to see what the new administration decides to do in terms of what areas of focus, how they want to use APEC, and how they want to move forward. And we'll do the best we can to be supportive of that.
Well, it seems like one of the areas that continues to hold promise is digital connectivity. Yep. And inclusivity and training and trade. Yep. In the digital space. Because with the rapid advancement of AI and other technologies, yep. We are all becoming increasingly interconnected in the cyber world and equally endangered by potential abuses there. Has there been serious discussion now about developing some frameworks that would allow us to, have a safer space for digital trade and digital engagement with all of our APEC partners?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of discussion around digital, and we really focused on this last year during our meetings in Seattle in August. We had a whole APEC Digital Month where we were trying to get at a lot of these issues. And we did it in that kind of way because we're not in a place, because of some of the geopolitics, where we can get at specific agreements on some of these things. I've said that there's 21 member economies in APEC. They probably have 21 different versions of what a healthy digital economy looks like. So that's challenging. But at the same point in time, APEC is a safe place to talk about how to create a safe space, right? So you can have discussions at APEC, both government to government and government to business, where a lot of this can come together. And this question and kind of your previous question are also tied together because, the Saturday, President Biden made his last intervention at APEC. And he said, look, there are these two transformative things that are happening around the world. One is the clean energy transition, and one is artificial intelligence. And so, and he went into great depth about like his own view of and his own concerns about those things. It's hard to argue with the fact that those are the two big, transformative things that are going on. And, whether it's political change here in the United States or in Japan recently or Indonesia recently or any of the other places, those are issues that we're going to have to continue to work on going forward, focus on going forward.
No, I mean, the two, as you and the president said, the two existential challenges are climate change and whether our technology is going to outstrip our capacity to contain it and make sure it serves humanity as opposed to overwhelming it. Yeah. But in order for us to do that, there's another element that's coming to the fore, which is our governance and our international governance, but also domestically, commitment to rule of law and some traditional values of the liberal order. Yeah. So has there been discussion about that third factor in your meetings at APEC?
Well, I think everything is related to anything that's about economic growth also has to be about good governance. Yeah. So when we talk about this Lima roadmap on the transition from the to the formal and global economies, initially the Peruvians were just talking about digital tools and mobile payments and things of that nature, and we made the case very, very strongly that you can't really talk about something like a transition to the formal economy unless you also talk about global governance, good governance, regulatory reform, anti-corruption, all of the hard things too. And so those conversations have to continue to go hand in hand.
Yeah, and if some of these things are going to move on with or without the United States, how do you see our role in APEC when we get to South Korea in 2025? For example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which we stepped away from, the other parties to it just moved ahead without us. And likewise, are you anticipating some of those moves? And then how does the United States continue to maintain its primacy here?
Well, look, I would say that the other member economies in APEC, they really value APEC. I mean, it's been very clear to me over the last 3 years in the way they turned up here in San Francisco, in the way they just turned up in Lima, Peru, they really value. So yes, obviously, I mean, they're going to continue on, irregardless of the U.S. Level of engagement. But I think, I don't want to speak for the other member economies, but I do think they would say if they were here that, APEC with strong U.S. engagement is better than APEC without.
Yeah. Well, we're very lucky to have you and your leadership at APEC, and thanks for the briefing. I'm going to open it up to a few other folks within the room. So when I call on you, if you could just say your name and where you're from, and then ask your question. So are there questions? To put on my glasses, I can. Yes, Larry.
I think there's a mic coming. You got people online now, Larry. There's got to be a mic.
Exactly. Yeah. Larry Greenwood, Bauer Group Asia. Can you talk, Matt, a little bit more about where APEC is on their discussion of AI? It's a relatively new issue for APEC. And do you think, I know that the informal SOM is still coming up, but do you think South Korea is going to put that as a priority in their agenda?
Yeah, I think they will within the context of the digital economy. Korea is going to host a digital ministerial next year, which, as far as I know, has never happened in APEC before. They've had one in ASEAN, but not APEC. And so I think that'll be a really positive thing. But we were talking about artificial intelligence the other day at the CEO Summit and at an event. And look, the way I look at it is, well, number one, APEC is a non-binding organization, so you're never going to get anything binding on AI at APEC. It's also the challenge for APEC because of the way the calendar works, and that for those of you who aren't familiar, the APEC calendar starts with the first events being in December, and then it finishes in November. So you start off in December with all of your agenda setting. The problem with AI is the technology is moving so quickly. I thought about this a lot in 2023. If we had set up an agenda, an AI initiative in December or February, people would have laughed at it by the time we got to November, right? Because so much had happened. And I think that is a challenge with AI. But I think in APEC, the good thing, when it comes to engagement on AI is you do have all the stakeholder engagement. You do have the experts who, come through, in all the different working groups. And so, I think that those opportunities present places where Korea could really, do some interesting things there. And, I'm looking forward to seeing what they have in store.
Well, I mean, just on that point, there may be some areas in which you could establish principles on AI. So AI is basically composed of three things. You've got the compute, which is just the chips, the algorithms, and then there's the data. Mm-hmm. And we're all going to be in competition to make the best chips and come up with the smartest algorithms. But one of the questions is what data you're going to feed. Yeah. And that could have dramatic effects on whether or not AI serves humanity or overwhelms it. Yep. And at least being able to focus on that element of it, the what is on limits and off limits, and what agreement can we reach to ensure that AI is beneficial to a safe and prosperous world. Yep. Yeah. Yes. Gentlemen.
Excuse me, this is Roger Dong. I'm a retired Air Force China specialist, and I was just reading today's paper about what was an agreement between Xi and Biden, although it doesn't necessarily hold true for Trump, but they agreed that they would never allow AI to control the nuclear trigger, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that is. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't in the bilateral meeting on Saturday, but no, I think that's the kind of, again, trying to make sure we have open lines of communication about that sort of thing, and certainly artificial intelligence as related to nuclear program is obviously a priority that we do want to make sure we get right. So it's very important that they talked about that.
Yep. And Japan's been developing some protocols around that, whether the humans should be on the loop, in the loop, those sorts of things, and getting the leaders together on that issue seems to be another opportunity for APEC to lead, even if things get more complicated with climate change and some of the other initiatives.
And I think the other advantage when we do talk about AI, we're talking about so many different things. It's such a broad agenda. Right. Like you mentioned data, or you could also be talking about AI in the health space, or you could be talking about AI in so many different ways. And this is one of the advantages I do think APEC has, is that you have so many different working level efforts that you can sort of approach it from a pretty broad set of issues.
Yeah. No, this is a pretty good example in that it's an economic forum, but they're talking about kinetic uses of AI.
Yeah. One over there.
Oh. Yes. And you'll be next, and I think those will be the last two.
Hi, Ambassador. From your Peru, when you were talking to APEC member countries, what were the things that they were perhaps most excited about in terms of opportunities, perhaps beyond AI? And what do you think are the biggest challenges they're seeing in the immediate future? And additionally, were there any particular markets or countries you were really excited by in terms of their economic development and innovation? I'm thinking of perhaps India or the Philippines or ASEAN, or indeed Latin America.
Yeah. So, again, it's hard to boil down all the conversations into a kind of one country or group of countries. I mean, I do think that people are very excited about Korea hosting APEC next year. I had never really done any work with Korea until I came back to Washington from Beijing in 2020, and couldn't believe the degree to which we engage Korea on economic issues, on everything from digital to clean energy. I mean, I think a lot of people aren't aware that Korea has probably been the leading foreign direct investor in the United States during the last 4 years. A lot of that's in semiconductors and EV batteries and those kinds of things. So I think people are very excited about Korea hosting. President Yoon was in the United States 3 times last year. Once for his own visit, once for APEC, and once for the Camp David trilat. So the other thing that's I've really seen over the last 3 years is the rise of the Southeast Asian economies. I mean, there are 7 ASEAN members, the Association for Southeast Asian Nations members in APEC. All of their economies are growing quickly. Supply chains are, heading, in that direction. And so I think that's also, an area where There's a lot of interest in that, that part of the region. But again, a lot of focus on clean energy, a lot of focus on digital, again, trying to focus on overcoming some of the economic headwinds that we've been facing. And, the last couple of years, it's been some really great conversation at the leaders level and ministerial level and at all levels as we've tried to figure out how to do that.
Ambassador Marcial, you get the last question.
I teed him up. I said Southeast Asia.
Thanks, Scott Marcial at Stanford and our group Asia. Actually, I'm not going to ask about Southeast Asia. You were in Peru and this meeting was happening, this important APEC meeting was happening at the same time that COP29 was taking place in Baku. Obviously, both focused in different ways on climate change. So 2 questions related. One, how much interaction and data flow is there between those 2 events, if any? And second, the reporting out of not just COP29, but over the last couple of years on climate change has been pretty alarming. And did you feel that in APEC? I mean, were leaders and others showing that same level of alarm or reacting to it?
Yep. Yes, definitely. And I think one of the things that surprised me the most when I took this job in 2022 was how much people were talking about climate change. Because when I worked on APEC previously, 2011, 2012, nobody talked about climate change. They talked about green growth, maybe. They talked about environmental goods and services, but nobody was talking about climate change. That was kind of a term that people weren't going to use in the APEC setting. So I think where APEC has kind of found its niche is it's not a climate negotiating body like COP29, but it is a place where we're trying to mainstream sustainability and climate change type agenda across the entire organization. And so Thailand really took the lead in promoting that 2 years ago when they hosted. And that's really continued. Lots of mentions last week about COP29, about the work we need to do in APEC on sustainability and how it all ties together. And so for sure, that was a big part of the discussion last week. And as you said, the sense of urgency was definitely there as well when the leaders were talking. So yeah, we definitely see that.
Well, it's been a year since the Golden Gate Declaration. A couple things have happened along the way, including the persistence of 2 major wars and a historic election in the United States, whose consequences we still haven't fully processed. And nonetheless, you managed to stay on track with APEC through the year to make advancements on the commitments of the declaration, to make new commitments in Peru last week. And we wish you great success in the year ahead as you prepare for South Korea. We're very, very fortunate to have you, Ambassador Murray, as our representative to APEC and to have you as a part of our foreign service and leadership. So thank you for your time tonight, and thank you for the great work that you've been doing.
Great, thank you.
Good to see you.
That was the perfect close, and we expect to see you next year, Ambassador Murray, and I hope you take some time to get some well-deserved rest.
2 years.
Upcoming programs that we have in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, Seattle, and virtually, cybersecurity in Asia. That's in partnership with Google on December 10th in Silicon Valley. We have our big annual Future of U.S.-China conference. You are not going to want to miss that. January 16th, we have Kevin Rudd coming out, as well as a bunch of policy folks from DC. We are going to revive ping pong diplomacy. So if you want to figure out what that is with us, please join us. We're doing a program on the Quad on February 11th. Thank you again to Ambassador Murray, Ambassador Bleich. Thank you to our team, Nina, Christy, Jason, Evan, Renee, and our interns. Thank you so much. We cannot do it without you. We have a brief reception in the back. We have Reichel Foundation wines and Freeman wines, so you know they're going to be good, with Northern California being part of the organizers for this. So thank you very much. Thank you.